Good afternoon. I want to share with you my last lecture of the semester, which was last night. Um, I will continue to create more of these videos of my lectures, again, starting in the spring semester, which I believe is in January. So we're start up right away. But I want to make sure to get these messages out to people, share people, give me feedback. And the last session we had is I sort of think of it as the grand finale, because here we're going to talk about cultural empowerment. And in particular, we're going to walk through an example of how you can transition from conflict to innovation using some design thinking techniques. But to start this conversation, we first need to realize that conflict is where innovation comes from. If we don't have conflict, if we don't seek out conflict and diversity of perspectives, there's nothing around which to drive innovation. So conflict isn't bad. In fact, it's inevitable for any growing culture. The challenge is to look beyond the initial high-level fighting, the disagreement, all the yelling and screaming and typing messages in caps, and really dig underneath that surface to find the hidden assumptions that the different stakeholders are bringing. Understand their rationales for why they think the way to do. Don't challenge their thinking. Seek to understand their rationales. And finally, try to understand their unstated needs. They've got needs. They got certain things they're trying to accomplish. They have desired outcomes. Let's seek those out. And so there are some techniques that we can use to actually do that. And I'm going to walk through a few design tool techniques here with an example of how we can leverage some design thinking techniques to help us surface out and drive the ideation necessary to drive conflict. But first, we're going to start with a story. And the story starts with the auto industry in the 1960s and 1970s that produced great cars, right? 1968 for me was like the epitome of great cars, GTOs and Shelbys and Chevelles and there was 68 was like just a Camaros. It was just like a great era for cars. What happened in 1975, though, was due to the Arab oil embargo and people sitting in long lines to buy gasoline because it wasn't a matter of price, it was a matter of supply. Our federal government decided we needed to improve fuel efficiencies, and it created a dilemma for manufacturers, automakers, and how to solve that problem. So their first approach to this was what I call the scarcity mentality, right? Which is I could either have mileage or horsepower, but I couldn't have both. And we saw through the late 70s and early 80s the building of some just horrible cars. The Ford Maverick, the Ford Pinto explodes on impact. The Vega, there was just a slew of cars that were all trying to improve their mileage because they had a mandate to do and the result was that we were trading off horsepower for mileage. It was just, again, one of this scarcity mentality. It had to have one or the other. And by the way, we see this or mentality in a lot of the political conversations, a lot of social media generated conversations. It's either this or that. And what happened in the automotive industry is they entered this age of exploration. They leveraged conflict and they explored different ideas. Some of the ideas like the Wankel engine, these kind of things didn't work. The aluminum engine didn't work too well. It tended to melt, but they tried different things. And some of these things stuck. Turbocharging, supercharging, hybrid engines, right? And deactivating cylinders and cars that shut down at stoplights and turn back on, right? You saw what happened during this period of exploration innovation. You started to see that horsepower was increasing, but the mileage was kind of staying the same. They kind of said, we're going to stick around 25 miles per gallon, and we're going to find out some way to drive up. And it started this period of conflict that eventually led to this idea, what I call the abundance mentality, that wait a second, we could have both. And we started seeing cars that not only had phenomenal fuel efficiency, but also had incredible power. All the electrical vehicles started coming out, hybrids. I've got a couple of hybrids. I got 3 hybrids actually, right? And EVs. And some of these EVs, they get infinite miles per gallon. And they have some of them like the Tesla Plaid has over 1,000 horsepower. And so the industry went through this battle, this journey of first this or mentality. I had to struggle to please one party, other, a realization that, wait a second, if we bring ourselves together, we start ideating, we can actually explore, learn, fail, learn from the failure, and eventually reach this abundance mentality. And it based on some work that the Fogg behavior model highlights, is that to do this, to accomplish this, to turn conflict into innovation requires three things. One, a motivation to do that, right? A customer market that's demanding better, not only better mileage, but better horsepower was the motivation. The market speaks loudly. The ability, and the ability improved, right? As we explored, we became more comfortable with different styles of engines. We created more lightweight cars and more aerodynamic cars, and we started our ability to solve this improved. Excuse me. But it was a trigger point that really drove this. There was a trigger that created this staring down the abyss, if you're the automaker, that said, we have to do something different. And that was the 1975 CAFE ordinance that mandated the oil mileage change. So we can solve this problem, but much like in the same way we saw in the automotive industry, we need to understand that we need some conflict in order to drive that innovation that leads to shifting from that scarcity mentality to that abundance mentality. So let's walk through a real world example. I'll skip through this. And so let's talk about a real world example. The example I want to talk about is, well, first I want to show some design thinking tools, some techniques, tools you can use. One of my favorite tools is the double diamond. And this is where you bring together a broad group of diverse perspectives. We see this in our vision workshop exercises, that we bring in people who have different perspectives, people who don't agree. Find the naysayer, bring them in. They've got a reason why they're a naysayer. And you walk through the double diamond process. And it basically walks through a process of, first off, you need to frame the problem space. And so you go through a process of divergence, of really capturing everything that people have, right? You try to discover in a space. You use tools like the jobs to be done and journey maps and user interviews and empathy maps, and you try to capture a broad range of the challenges and the problems, the journey maps, the jobs to be done, empathy maps, the personas, really start to uncover things such as, well, what is my desired outcomes? Right? And our desired outcomes may not be the same, right? And what are the KPIs and metrics around which I'm going to measure my success? And you start to capture these building blocks, these Lego blocks that you can later on piece, and then you need to converge and say, okay, which of these problems are most important? Which ones are the most important that impact the most people and have the most impact from a society, an economic, customer, financial perspective? So again, you diverge and then you converge on a strong problem definition. Then you go into the solutioning space. And again, you go through the same process. This is exactly what the automotive industry did, right? You have this divergence where you're exploring all kinds of different ideas. All ideas are worthy of consideration, we like to say. And you try all kinds of different things. Many of these things fail. Many of these things fail. But it's through this failure that we can learn things, right? We learn what doesn't work so we can try different things. And eventually you got to go through a clustering and prioritization process. Think about the prioritization matrix we always use, right? And trying to figure out, okay, these are all of our solutions. Let's go through the prioritization process to figure out which ones we're going to prototype and test first, and how we put in place a learning process so that what we learn from that prototype and that testing impacts our second iteration. So let's talk about a real world problem. Here in Iowa, we have water quality problems, severe water quality problems that has caused all kinds of social and political angst. How do we apply these tools to help address that problem? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to bring together a broad range of stakeholders who are impacted by this. And this is my example. I'm going to use the farmer, who is a source of a lot of the nitrates that are running off into the water supplies. The citizens like myself who are expecting safe and affordable water and don't want to have to spend to buy double osmosis systems, put them all through the house and all kinds of filters. You have legislatures who are, trying to be legislators for life so they can make a lot of money, and they're trying to balance the political, economic, and environmental policies. And the Public Water Agency is the one responsible for monitoring, treating, and compliance. So the jobs to be done canvas here, I actually had to modify it. This is great. It was a great tool, but I found there were two things I had to put in there, especially when I wanted to link this into the thinking like a data science methodology. Many of you have the book and know the methodology. And there are two things that we spend time on in steps one at a broad level and step two at a stakeholder level is to identify what are our desired outcomes. That is, what does good look like? And second one is, how are we going to measure this? What are the KPIs and metrics around which I'm going to measure the effectiveness, the progress, the success of my desired outcomes? And so when I basically think about running workshops, you've got these jobs to be done, modified jobs to be done, charts on boards, and you've got all kinds of stakeholders putting on there their desired outcomes and post-it notes. Again, you've got the different roles we're capturing for, and it allows you to start to come together. This is kind of a summary of what you might see, right? Each stakeholder has what's their focus job, what their aspirations are, their key job states, of course, desired outcomes, which I find are really critical. Combination of desired outcomes and value metrics are the basis around which I can use to start building data science, start building propensity scores and entity propensity models and things such as that. So I start to see the different perspectives of these different people, right? And so basically what I do is I want to basically start to cluster those, defining the problem space. That these are the problems we want to address, right? Trust and transparency, right? It benefits all shareholders, what the rationale is, economic viability, environmental sustainability, right? And some quotes that we can use to help make sure that this process stays focused on the individual stakeholders, the humans involved in this process. And then we go into the solution space. Remember, we're going to diverge first. We're going to do brainstorming. We're going to do lots of different IDs like crazy eights and rapid sketching. Of course, the thinking like a data science methodology is full of techniques for how do you start ideate around these kind of spaces? How do you bring together people and start thinking about this? You got to not only bring in your domain experts, you start bringing in your data scientists, your data engineers, your AI engineers to start helping in this process, start to imagine. And then you basically go back to this. How do we start to explore the solution space, right? We start building prototypes. We start making sure we got a learning process in place. We're documenting our assumptions, we're mapping them, and then we're constantly stressing those assumptions to make sure we have the right assumptions. And you end up with sort of a project timeline that looks like this, right? You start in the development phase, you have lots of different ideas, but you come together on a number of key metrics around that all parties can agree on. You start the prototype phase, you pilot, you scale, you test, you learn quickly, you fail fast, you learn faster, and eventually you scale. And you may not kind of come up with something. This is what we came up in the class, right? This is kind of we call it a collaborative dashboard that all the different four stakeholders can work off of. And it has the key metrics for tracking, but it also has in the upper right-hand corner our YODA. This is our trained Gen AI tool. It's been trained on the problem of water quality. It's captured all the information that we've been capturing from the process. It's been uploaded with the Socratic method to help us ask more Socratic questions. It's been uploaded with the books of Luke and Matthew to make sure it's acting in a responsible and ethical manner. We use and upgrade my thinking like a data science methodology so it has a framework for how we drive value. And so I've got this YODA, your own digital assistant, that's been trained on the water quality problem that can provide a vehicle that allows, during the collaboration process, people ask questions and we learn from that question process. So we got this sort of continuous learning environment here, and then a Slack-like conversation place where people can ask questions. They can add additional information. We can use that to feed the YODA. So we create this kind of collaborative environment. Again, you test things quickly, you fail, you try, but you create an environment where everybody can see how they can have a positive impact on that, right? This is not about compromising to the least worst option. This is about synergizing towards the best option. And so there are 9 tenets we talk about in the class. I'm going to try not to go too long here, but there are 9 things that I think every organization who wants to basically be a empowered innovation organization needs to embrace. Number 1, they need organizational empowerment. They need to make sure that everybody in the organization has been empowered to ideate this like organizational improvisation concept. So we've got people who know what their roles are, know what their skill sets are, and they can move between teams to solve problems without losing operational integrity. Number 2, critical thinking. We have to have critical thinking throughout this process, especially using some of these Gen AI tools that can hallucinate. We need to make sure we're asking it, what's your rationale? What's your source, right? Those are great questions to ask, by the way, when you're talking to humans, and they've got different opinions. So we want to install a critical thinking approach that we learn to not challenge in an aggressive way, but challenge in a way that we're trying to learn and understand. We got to basically, I said, we got to learn to identify and harness conflict, this end mentality. So we swing away from compromising to the least worst option to leveraging these trigger events to create and synergize around the best option. We need to make certain we have humans at the center of this process and leveraging what humans do best. Curiosity, imagination, creativity, the ability to do what ifing, the ability to sort of look over the corner, around the edges to see what's going on. Empower that curiosity, that imagination, that need and ability to explore. Number 5, ethics, baby, ethics, right? And there's, by the way, if you want a quick lesson on the importance of proactive ethics, the difference between do no harm and do good, just reread the Bible story of the Good Samaritan. Number 6, helping to envision the desired state, the future. Design thinking provides all kinds of tools that help us to imagine what we want to have, but in a framework so we're imagining around a problem we're trying to solve, not just randomly spitballing around a problem that may or may not be important. Organizations need universal AI and data literacy. Well, I know this book that some guy wrote about this, but the bottom line is you need to bring everybody along in this journey. Why? Because your organizational tribal knowledge is buried in those people, and you want to surface it. You want to empower that so you can drive more innovative outcomes. Number 8, collaboration, ideation, the ability, I'm a big fan of all ideas are worthy of consideration. The idea that you people have great ideas, and most organizations do a fabulous job of stifling those great ideas. Don't stifle, encourage. Even all ideas are worthy of consideration. Think about that statement for a second. All ideas are worthy of consideration. That's a powerful enabler. It says your ideas matter. Now, most ideas suck, right? The thing is, if you got a bunch of people who start ideating, you got a bunch of kind of half ideas coming up here and there, all of a sudden people are saying, wait, if I take some of the pieces of this and some of the pieces of that and this, all of a sudden you got something that might be pretty impactful. So the 9 tenets of empowered innovation, bring them all together. Let's wrap up the class. Let's wrap up the semester with talking about that throughout the semester, value was the foundation for everything we did. And value starts with economics, understanding, how is value created and what is value as defined by our stakeholders. We use design thinking to sort of flesh that out, to really understand, to quantify, to validate, to prioritize. We use data to basically architect value and how we frame the problem, how we define the decisions, they select our successful KPIs, build propensity scores, anti-propensity models. We use intelligence analytics. Think about the range of AI, predictive AI, causal AI, generative AI, autonomous AI, to allow us to build entity propensity models and entity language models that basically take advantage of the AI utility function to help us drive more thoughtful, more responsible, more ethical outcomes. And the idea of an empowered innovation, that we're always trying to drive for this ability to solve hairy problems by bringing together different people in an ethical manner, pride in making sure it's measurable, making sure it's accountable, make sure it's transparent, and finally, it's evidence-based. And the last slide I'll leave you with. All this is great. All this is great if you have the right mindset. And by the way, this means that step 1 is all about awareness. It's about understanding the state of what things truly are. This is where we stumble. Confirmation bias plagues our society. It plagues most organizations. We want to believe what we want to believe. And when we get information that doesn't align with what we believe, we want to discard it. But that can't happen. You've got to be aware, truthfully, honestly aware of what's going on, and accept that as the truth so that we can move forward. You may not agree with that. It may not sync with your political beliefs, but if that is the way it is, then that's the way it is. If Iowa is the 51st ranked state in the union from an economic perspective, I don't care how much you want to cry and moan about who's to blame. The problem is that's the truth. And what we want to do is take and own that truth and start moving on to the state of curiosity. What could we do? And how do I empower people? And how do I collaborate? Commitment, by the way, is all about this positive oriented collaboration. Bringing people together that don't agree with each other, but all bring very valuable rationale and perspectives. And finally, you have to believe at the end of the day that this is worthwhile. You have to believe that what you're doing is going to benefit not only yourself and all the other stakeholders, but benefit the society on the whole. So anyway, so thanks for listening. This is the last one for this semester, but you will start seeing more of these come out next year when we start off again in the spring. So thank you for your time, and I am going to post this now.